All right, it's been a couple of games since the Memphis Grizzlies traded Jaren Jackson Jr. So now the question is, Ruben, where do we go from here? We heard from GM Zach Kleiman. It signaled a rebuild, but it's kind of starting to get a little bit too much of a rebuild. It's starting to get kind of egregious.
Can I tell you where we go from here? All the way down.
Embrace the tank.
It's going down.
Our guy Rusty Wiggins said it best. You got to sometimes disaster for Debonsa, disaster for Darren. What did he say? Like blow for booze or whatever analogy you want to do. But with this whole Grizzlies saga, obviously we had a lot of people who knew the details about it. So now we're kind of bringing back our insiders. And what better insider to bring in than a friend of the program? We have not had him on in a while. Last time he was on the program, Ruben, he brought some Ja 2s with us, the Kool-Aid Jais. And welcome back to the program via Zoom, Mr. Drew Hill from the Daily Memphian. What up, man?
What's up, guys? How are you?
Oh, we're good. Can't say the same about the Grizz right now. Right now, we doing all right. We're winning every day. I'm winning every day. What about you?
So Drew,
it's been a rough go for sure. It's been a rough go these last few games.
So Drew, like I said, we were a little bit more upbeat last time you were here because you brought the shoes and the Jaws and the Kool-Aids. But when it comes to Ja Morant, it doesn't seem like it's been kind of like positivity. You have done some extensive reporting in Insider. Kind of tell us a little bit about what that whole Ja Morant trade saga was like. So, because a lot of people seem, it seems like the narrative is Ja is a negative trade asset. Would you say that would be the case?
I think if there was a positive trade to be out there, or maybe a neutral trade, it probably was likely that was a deal that the Grizzlies were going to take. And I think that was mostly confirmed by Zach Kleiman based on the press conference that we just had less than a week ago. So just to recap there from start to finish, I think all of this really started in the offseason when the Grizzlies did not give an extension to Ja Morant. He never publicly said that was something that he wanted, but I think that's something that's clearly played out and was a point of tension. And Zach Kleiman said at the beginning of the season, this is a big season for Ja. We need him to play like an all-NBA player if we're going to reach these high ceilings and this high bar that we're setting for ourselves. And we know we're not good enough at this point, and it's going to take that version of Ja for us to get there. So far, that hasn't happened, mainly because he hasn't been available. We saw the argument with the coaching staff that Ja Morant had earlier this season that led to a suspension. I don't necessarily think that was his frustrations weren't only with what happened in the game. I think it goes back to the extension and that sort of thing. And so I think overall you just had a franchise that was frustrated that their star player hasn't been able to stay on the court, and a star player who was frustrated that the franchise hadn't necessarily committed to him the way that he felt like he deserved. And so it has led to this, highly tense sort of, I don't want to call it a battle, but like back and forth between both Ja and the franchise. And eventually, you make it to trade season, and it's reported that he's being shopped by the Memphis Grizzlies on the NBA trade market. I don't think that necessarily came as a massive surprise based on what we knew about the situation before and what the picture that was painted early on in the season. So it's been definitely probably a little bit more public than either party would like as it relates to just the sort of the drama. And I think that, in the end, the Grizzlies would have liked to start a full rebuild. Zach Kleiman made that very clear. He also said something to the effect of, it takes two teams to make a trade, and the Grizzlies didn't feel like they had a second team. So in terms of Ja's value, I would say it at least was not what the Grizzlies expected it to be or wanted it to be. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was all negative. It could have been neutral, right? It could have been just expiring contracts. The Grizzlies are not going to be in the business of giving out trade details. But I think if there was a neutral trade out there, the Grizzlies would have at least considered it at this point, knowing the future of the franchise and the direction that they're taking now, and they just didn't do it.
Is it, when you're on the outside looking in, so people just reading social media and, average fans who aren't embedded in the news every day of it, they're probably hoping for some kind of reconciliation. Hey, maybe they can turn this thing around and Ja can get back in it. Are we past that point? Is it, because you know how superstar athletes can be when it comes to clashing with front offices. Are we past the point of no return here?
Until the Grizzlies fully closed the book on it, the book is not closed, right? But it feels like that would be an extreme long shot at this point because of what Zach Kleiman had to say. Teams going for a younger build. They're moving in a new direction. They started a rebuild. I think the words were, I'm not quoting him here, but he tossed in like a as much as we could sort of comment into the press conference suggesting, look, we were trying to trade even more here, but we weren't able to get off of some of the players. You would assume he was talking about Ja Morant there. So based on the fact that Ja probably, if you put yourself in his shoes, how much does he really want to be on a rebuilding team at 26 years old that may be 2-3 years of being bad, before they're good again, depending on what happens in the lottery, I think. What's his preference in this? We know he said, I'm a loyal guy. I want to stay in Memphis, and he sort of backed up, his fans in London, did a little bit of a course reversal after the press conference in Berlin. But now the situation's much different. Jaren Jackson's not here. Desmond Bane obviously got traded over the summer. So I think at this point, when you're just trying to take this logically, right? You're just trying to read the room. You have a GM and a franchise that's ready to turn the page and move on, and you have a star player that's now stuck in a situation that would probably not be the ideal situation for him. If you take all the emotion out of it and the fact that so many people here still love Ja, and you just look at the logic behind the situation, I honestly think, I don't know how anyone would reach any sort of conclusion other than, unless things really take a big turn and there's no trade again this summer and Ja gets healthy and he's okay with playing on the contract. There's just so many hoops that you have to jump through, right, to get there. And I don't see that happening.
Drew, it's a lot of ifs and hypotheticals you want to say, but I want to kind of take a glass half full approach. We look at players like Devin Booker, players like Karl Anthony Towns. They both were with franchises that went through rebuilds where they maybe came out and they made the playoffs, and then they had a period where they had to rebuild, and they stuck around. Now, obviously, Cat ended up eventually getting traded to the Knicks, but that was after Anthony Edwards came and they had their conference finals run. So I think there is still a world where Ja could stay and be patient, because what I've always said is, where else is Ja Morant going to go where he will have it like this, where the team is kind of his and he's the star guy? Anywhere else he goes, he won't be the number one guy. He may not even be the number two guy. What I think it will boil down to is how much he cares about that extension and the money. Because I'm a Hawks fan, so I saw it play out with Trae Young. And I think that's why the Hawks moved when they did, because they knew they weren't going to give Trae Young $50 million. And they knew Trae would feel some type of way about it. So they moved off on him. So I'm wondering, is Ja the same thing? Because I'd like to say, Drew, if Ja was okay with taking that pay cut, if Zach Kleiman's like, hey, man, we'll do 25, 30, and Ja was like, all right, I still want to be here. I trust in your vision. You've shown that you can draft well. We wouldn't even be having this discussion. I think with Ja, it's the money that he's commanding isn't matching the output because he can't stay healthy. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. But I think in terms of breaking down this situation, and what has to sort of be understood is that it is ultimately the organization that holds the power whether or not he gets traded or not, right? And so even if Ja's desire is to stay, if their desire is to start over, they're going to continue to look for a trade for Ja. They don't want to trade him for negative value. They don't want to have to attach future draft assets to move on from a player, especially a player that's beloved. But, even if Ja did say, look, I'm okay playing out this contract, or, I'm willing to prove it now to you that I'm deserving of more money, I still don't know if that's enough because you've already worked towards rebuilding. You've already gotten rid of the pieces that match the timeline around him. I know he's not like in his 30s yet, but you've moved towards a very young team here. And as we're all watching, they're playing for the NBA draft lottery right now. So you're going to add another younger player. So I just feel like in order for that to happen, there has to be reconciliation on both sides. It has to be from Ja and from the franchise. And the franchise has already made steps to move on. So to me, that's why, it's so in doubt, is because they've already taken the steps to play basketball beyond Ja Morant, when his era with this team is over. And they essentially said the last era of the team is over. That's what they said. That's what Zach Kleiman alluded to at the press conference. So maybe. And look, he didn't close the book all the way, and no GM should. He said we'll continue to evaluate our options. But to me, every other answer in that press conference suggested that he's going for the full rebuild, that they're going to try to build this thing around Zach Edey and Cedric Howard and whatever future draft capital they can turn into good players. And I also found it very fascinating, and I'm sure you were going to ask about this, but that he would not commit to saying Ja Morant will play again this season. He was very non-committal throughout. Yeah.
That would not surprise me at all. We've had this conversation off air before, where I've said if he doesn't get traded, I wouldn't plan on seeing him for the rest of the season. For whatever reason, he'll be out. I could see that easily happening. To your point, Drew, I don't see a reconciliation happening at this point. There's egos, personalities. Too much has been made public, is to what you said earlier. If a lot of this had been private, you could probably clean all that up. But so much of it has been public that it's hard to come back from some of that stuff. You mentioned draft just a few seconds ago, and I know Rich here is big on a few of these guys. Who would you love to see the Grizzlies draft in next year's draft?
There's the obvious answers here, right? There's the top of the class, which is extremely good. But when I look at Grizzlies draft prospects, there's a few things that I weigh heavily because there's a long history of Zach Kleiman selecting that type of player. And I look for high efficiency and productive college players, no matter age, no matter athleticism or position. The Grizzlies have a long history of drafting these types of guys. When you go look at, projected NBA efficiency among college players and their draft history, you had a player like John Conchar, right, who was on no one's radar, was a top 10 player. They signed him undrafted. Ja fit that mold. Brandon Clark fit that mold. Xavier Tillman fit that mold. David Roddy fit that mold. Jake LaRavia fit that mold. Zach Edey especially fit that mold. And so those are the type of players that I try to sort of single out when I evaluate draft prospects and get into the process of trying to figure out what the potential options are for the Grizzlies. The only times they've really gone off of that path has been for Zaire Williams, which I think there was some, there were some people in the building that were really fighting for that draft pick, although he didn't necessarily fit the mold. And so, that one was a little bit more controversial, I think, maybe within the Grizzlies front office when they made that pick, and that didn't work out. Gigi Jackson was a little bit of a swing. As you get into the later rounds, the Grizzlies will try on some of the more athletic players that don't have the efficiency numbers. But when I look at the top of this draft class, obviously Cam Boozer's incredible. You might have to have the number 1 overall pick to get him. We'll see how it turns out. I think he's an absolute fit for the Grizzlies. Caleb Wilson is another player at North Carolina who has a ton of upside and fits all the efficiency marks that the Grizzlies look for in a player. And then if you want to go a little bit further down in the draft, there's obviously very good guards with size that I think the Grizzlies should positionally be interested in, whether that be, Michael Brown, who plays at Louisville, who just had a massive game last night. I think he had like 45 points. Keaton Vogler. There's lots of options as big guards. But the players I'm watching a little bit later on in the draft here are high efficiency guys that maybe at the turn of the first round that the Grizzlies often pick before people expect. I'm talking about Joshua Jefferson at Iowa State, Dalen Swain at Texas. Those types of players, those types of wing players, I think are players that they could be interested in. JT Toppin at Texas Tech, who is obviously a big time college name at this point, but not necessarily considered in the top 10 of NBA prospects. But that's the type of player the Grizzlies go for. We saw it Zach Edey. So those are three names I'm watching closely.
All right, Drew, we are running out of time here. We could talk about this for so long, but we'll save it for another time. Obviously, it's a lot the Grizz are doing as they navigate a post-Jaren Jackson trade. And, man, it's just getting egregious out here with this tanking. But I'm not going to go on my soapbox on that. We'll save it for another time. We appreciate your time, Drew. Absolutely.
Drew, remember,
Thanks,
next
guys.
time you come on, I need you to sing your favorite Drew Hill song. Somebody's sleeping in my...
Oh, gosh. I get this. I get this all the time. I get this literally everywhere in this city too, because I know this is a big R&B town. So it's I didn't know that when I was a kid and I started going by Drew instead of Andrew. I didn't know that. I had no idea. Well, it's now turned into this, but I appreciate it, guys. Thanks.
Appreciate you, big dog.
You can always catch Drew Hill's great work at the Daily Memphian, a friend of the program. Thank you for the time, Drew.